And we're kicking things off right away with exclusive material. A fiery greeting to the occupiers from the armed forces of Ukraine. Russians are complaining about a strike on a military deployment point in Rilsk-Kursk region. And what's more, the aggressor has lost a Tor M2 air defense system on the front lines, which just for a moment costs around $25 million. Meanwhile, it seems the Kremlin's thugs are using a hit-your-own, so others are afraid tactic. Just think about it. A Russian plane dropped a half-ton bomb on the Belgorod region. By the way, the shell had less than 60 kilometers left to reach Ukraine. All the details are in our report.
Another enemy deployment site has been eliminated. The Russians complained about a missile strike in the Rilsk-Kursk region. Preliminary reports indicate that the deployment site of the 40th Marine Brigade of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation was hit.
A strike was carried out on the permanent deployment site, specifically the command and control post of the Russian army, using American weaponry, namely HIMARS. According to objective monitoring data, the command and control post was completely destroyed. Moreover, there is information from the Russian side itself that allows this target to be identified as an exclusively military facility. That is, both the evacuation of the wounded and, accordingly, the deceased servicemen of the Russian Federation have been recorded.
At the same time, the Ukrainian armed forces continue to destroy Russian army personnel and military equipment at the front. National Guardsmen burned a Russian Tor M2 air defense system worth about $25 million. Drones dropped explosives on enemy equipment several times. After that, the missile system caught fire, and the Russian occupiers began to flee. What happened to the crew of the system is unknown. But one thing is known: the Russian occupation forces operate by the principle of strike your own so that others are afraid. The Russian army once again dropped a half-ton bomb on the Belgorod region. The shell still had more than 60 kilometers to fly before reaching Ukraine.
Yes, this is not the first time. According to reports from Russian media themselves, at least 70 accidental releases of aerial bombs have been recorded. 62 FABs and 7 aerial bombs with a guided planning and correction module. It should be noted that this number of munitions was dropped by Russian aircraft specifically on the territory of the Russian Federation.
And while the aggressor's army is striking its own territory, the Russian dictator himself is trying to undermine cooperation and unity between the Ukrainian side and Europe and America. He also continues to insist on achieving his goals, among which is the complete capitulation of Ukraine. This is evidenced by calls to start negotiations based on the interrupted discussions and developments in Istanbul at the end of March 2022, according to analysts from the American Institute for the Study of War.
As of May 2025, not even the intermediate stage of the so-called special military operation has been completed, namely the capture of the entire territory of Donetsk and Luhansk regions, not to mention the strategic objectives such as denazification, demilitarization, and other Russian nonsense. That is why Putin is trying to use so-called peace-loving rhetoric to promote exclusively the Russian vision of ending the war in Ukraine at the expense of territorial concessions from our country and the effective disarmament of Ukraine's defense forces.
Let us recall that Putin refused to agree to a ceasefire in Ukraine. It is likely that he is betting on a summer offensive, according to the Center for Countering Disinformation.
It should be noted that, firstly, the Russian army's offensive has not stopped. Ukraine's territorial losses for the month of April amount to about 175 square kilometers. Yes, that is 6 times less than in November of last year. But nevertheless, the Russian army has intensified the nature of combat operations along the entire length of the Russian-Ukrainian front.
And in addition, Russia has created a secret unit that specializes in sabotage, cyber attacks, and assassinations across Europe. According to Western intelligence agencies, this is a shadow organization called the Department of Special Tasks.
And now it's time to analyze the situation on the blazing Pokrovsk front. The bloody rampage of the enemy army continues here as well. In the Pokrovsk direction, since the beginning of this day, the enemy has attacked in the areas of the populated areas of Novopoltavka, Mirolyubovka, Luch, Lisovka, Mirnograd, Udaknoye, Novosergievka, Novoalexandrovka, Kotlyarovka, Troitskoye, Andreyevka, Staraya Nikolaevka, Malinovka, Elizavetovka, and in the directions of Popovy Yar, Novonikolayevka, Muravka, Alexeyevka, and Zarya. At the same time, our defenders have repelled 50 enemy assault actions. Pokrovsk, Poltavka, Ilinovka, and Sukhoi Yar were subjected to airstrikes in this sector. And one more thing. Cornered, Putin is once again starting to rattle his Oreshnik. To be more specific and factual, over the Russian military training ground Kapustin Yar in the Astrakhan region, from which Russia previously launched its Oreshnik missile at Ukraine, the occupiers have closed the airspace. What could this indicate or warn us about? Watch further. Let's analyze everything and draw the right conclusions.
The Russian Federation is once again trying to intimidate Ukraine.
I can just see it now, how immediately, several billion people will say, how scary,
In Russia, they've once again pulled out their imaginary joker and started all waving it around. We're talking about Putin's much vaunted Oreshnik. The Russians have once again decided to try to frighten us with a strike using this weapon. Of course, this isn't being done directly. Putin and his circle haven't said that a strike on Ukrainian territory is being prepared. However, such a possibility does exist. It's all because of the closure of the airspace over the Kapustin Yar testing range. That's exactly where the Oreshnik was previously launched toward Dnipro. And at that time, there was a similar flight ban. This time, the Russians announced the closure of the airspace on May 12th and 13th from 6 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon local time.
Let's start with the fact that even using the Oreshnik against Dnipro was ineffective. In other words, we're talking about the fact that basically this is Putin's expensive toy, which he found as a substitute for, nuclear weapons, because he didn't dare to use nuclear weapons. So he decided to use some other kind of weapon that would create a wow effect. And in reality, that's what we saw in the video footage from Dnipro. It's all impressive. But again, if we talk about the combat use of this type of weapon, it's ineffective.
Putin himself knows this too. That's why Oreshnik wasn't mentioned for quite a long time. Even the propagandists didn't really threaten to blow anyone up with this missile.
A large number of Russian propagandists hardly cover the topic of Oreshnik at all because they understand that it's some kind of non-existent myth. And most likely this is simply the only ballistic missile that the Russian Federation has, which is effective, which has demonstrated its effective use. That's the Yars. It's an old Soviet missile that has been modernized, and most likely Oreshnik is also just a modernized Yas. Therefore, it's likely that, once again, we have to say that at such distances, it is ineffective. In other words, it does not fulfill its combat mission. It cannot carry a warhead that would cause, significant destruction.
But if we talk specifically about the situation with the airspace, the Russians are definitely up to something. The closure will extend from the ground up to unlimited altitude. This is a standard measure during ballistic missile tests. Whether this is about Oreshnik or something else remains an open question.
Russia is fighting according to doctrine, according to Gerasimov's doctrine. That is, it's not just about conducting military operations, but also about psychological pressure strikes on the civilian population and creating various other information waves that would cause panic among the population. Therefore, the closure of the airspace over Kapustin Yar can be seen as an attempt once again to launch Russian propaganda using Oreshnik.
But we should not underestimate Russia in its pursuit of terrorism.
In principle, from an engineering standpoint, we're talking about a weapon that is not very effective, but from the perspective of psychological pressure and, let's say, the madness of the Russian Federation, we're saying that in principle Russia could use it. But I am more than sure that in this case, another mine on the launch of this Oreshnik will be unsuccessful, and Russia will lose not only Plesetsk, but also Kapustin Yar.
If the Russian Federation still decides to launch the Oreshnik, we will find out about it soon enough. After all, we should not forget that Russia is required to notify the United States about the launch of such a missile. Washington, in turn, must notify Ukraine. As for the missile itself, in any case, it is nothing more than intimidation. The Russian Federation launches attack drones, cruise and ballistic missiles, glide bombs, and so on over Ukrainian territory every day. And the response to the Oreshnik should be the same as to any other means of attack. Do you hear the air raid siren? Go to shelter.
Now we will move to the Orikhiv and Pridniprovsk directions of the front. The Russian world continues to destroy kill and maim here as well. In the Orikhiv direction, the enemy carried out 6 offensive actions in the areas of Malatokmachka, Mali-Shcherbaki, Artomaye-Noye-Duen, and towards Pavlivka. Ukrainian units repelled all attacks. The enemy also carried out airstrikes on Pavlivka and Novoyakovlivka. In the Pridniprovsk direction, the enemy attacked our defenders' positions 4 times. They did not achieve any success. At the same time, the aggressor launched an airstrike on Kazatske. And now, a few words about Putin's fake 3-day ceasefire. In the Zaporizhzhia region, in the same Orikhiv direction, the occupiers began storming Ukrainian positions from the very morning of the first day, but did not succeed. Ukrainian soldiers were already prepared for such a provocation. Unable to achieve success on the battlefield, the enemy is destroying the city of Orikhiv itself, dropping more and more aerial bombs, and further demolishing the already devastated infrastructure. But even under such conditions, people still live in the city. The following report from the Orikhiv direction is by TSN journalist Ruslan Tejlarisyawa. Fate capability. Well, all the gas charges.
These are exactly the gas charges that, when triggered, release gas and produce smoke, just like on stage.
A gray-haired 48-year-old paramedic shows what the occupiers are currently dropping on the heads of our defenders. These are chemical grenades produced in 2024.
It paralyzes. It paralyzes your breathing, everything stings, your eyes water. Even if you touch it with your hands. That is, even if the room has already been ventilated, it still remains on things. And then, if you rub your face or eyes with your hands, it starts to burn badly. Your eyes start to water, and it just blocks your breathing.
This is what the morning of the first day of the ceasefire looked like. The enemy is launching an assault to gain a foothold somewhere near our positions.
That's how they took advantage of the first ceasefire. They sent in their groups, checked things out, assessed the situation, and then, as soon as the ceasefire ended, they immediately went in. But the second time, that trick didn't work for them.
Took off my uniform, washed up, and had something to eat. Lucky, starting from scratch. There are a huge number of enemy drones and assault troops there. Artillery fire in grid patterns and a lottery. That's what going in and out of positions is like.
My entry took a whole day, because they started shelling after yet another assault. They have their preventive measures and things like that. But nothing worked out for them, so I had to stay longer. But the guys managed. Well done. But actually, getting in is not even the hardest part. But delivering supplies, we carry everything with our own hands.
Then this is what the end of an enemy assault looks like. The enemy is eliminated in the basements of Robotyne, and they also gather in the groves around.
Their assaults never stop at all. They're constantly conducting reconnaissance by combat. Small groups of 2, 3, 4, or 5 people go in, targeting specific spots. That depends on the situation and the position. And they're trying to pinpoint our positions. They move in groups of 2 or 3 people. Accordingly, we open fire. As a result, we reveal our positions. And then life at the position gets a lot more interesting, because they start leveling it to the ground.
Ihor with the call sign Grisha is from Ternopil. He worked abroad in Britain and Poland. He quit his job and returned to Ukraine. He went from being an assault trooper to becoming an officer.
I don't even know. At the start of the full-scale invasion, I was heading in with a clear goal: to tear up the paving stones on Red Square, register as a sole proprietor, and sell them. But now the situation is changing a bit. I don't know. I'll act according to the situation. Well, I won't be filming weddings with a drone, because that's not my profession. Infantry is a slightly different field. Honestly, I haven't really thought about it yet. For now, the task is to finish what we've started. We need to win.
In addition to infantry assaults, there have also been strikes with Kabis. 500-kilogram aerial bombs are destroying the fields and the city of Orikhiv.
Not a single house in Orikhiv has been left intact. Entire streets have been destroyed. The occupiers have intensified their attacks on the city, both artillery and airstrikes. All around, there are fragments from artillery shells lying everywhere. The city is under constant fire from both artillery and drones. That's why it's dangerous for local residents to stay outside in Orikhiv for long.
The city's streets are overgrown with greenery, with ruins sinking into them. Only dogs and cats are seen on the streets. Halina is 77. Here in the city, she is alone. Children in Zaporozhye. She doesn't want to leave because she has a garden and animals that her neighbors abandoned and that need to be fed.
When it boomed, when the shelling started, I stayed at my daughter's for 3 weeks. These are other people's dogs, other people's cats. They need to be fed. So I came back and now I tend Olga's garden and my own, even though my leg hurts.
The residents of Orikhiv live without electricity, gas or water. They survive on humanitarian aid and what they can grow from the land. Whatever they harvest, they eat. Valerie drives around the streets to fill up the tanks with a vital liquid, plain water. Here, it's worth its weight in gold.
We make sure to deliver it here at least once a week. But now water consumption has increased, and sometimes we have to deliver to the same spot twice a week. Sometimes it's a cube, sometimes it's 500, sometimes it's 200. The least of all is 200.
The apartment buildings lose a floor, sometimes even 2 every time. Russian aviation is tearing them apart during this 3-day false truce. Civilians are still alive because out there beyond the city, the sky above their heads is protected by those who haven't given up and have been defending the Orikhiv region with weapons in hand since 2022.